And here on the second turn of Magnesia, we see the Romans launched forward. First the Velite line, and then the second line, Hestardes and some cohort units. Just trying to push the fight as quick as possible on this side where they're not at a supreme disadvantage. Because once the Seleucids swing around, things are going to get ugly in my view. So if they can get some breaks here and start cutting up and turn this into chaos, maybe the cav, maybe this wing over here can't do the damage that it can otherwise do, and maybe they can win the game just on points before their tactical situation collapses. And just as easily as the Velites drove away those skirmishers, the heavy infantry plowing into the Velites pretty much evaporated them. Then, because of momentum, the Seleucids continued the attack, pushing those heavy infantry harder, taking cohesion hits on them, routing a few of them as they smashed into the Roman line. And you can see they broke, it's hard to tell because everything's yellow here, but they broke through in quite a few places. This end's still fairly solid, but there's a big couple of holes in the Roman line there. It's going to take the Principes, or whatever that second line is, the cohorts, etc., to push up and try to prevent that from collapsing. Right now, it's looking kind of bad for the Romans in the sense that both flanks are kind of collapsing. And the Romans slam forward. Just a couple of stacks of units, four Principes slamming forward. Broke a couple of the heavies and are solidifying that line. But they didn't get the momentums they need to try to rally the forces here. Maybe one of the other leaders will. I don't know. So what have we seen so far this turn? Picked it up again in the morning, obviously. A little bit of fighting along here, a little bit of rallying actions with the Romans over there. Big action though, sort of this pivot coming here, positioning some of the infantry to start taking advantage of this flank. Then we actually had a Roman cav go charging forward into here and pursued one of them heavy silver shields guys, but smacked into some more in the pursuit. And the Roman cav, what little there is on that side, may be in a lot of trouble having put itself there. Onward. Another line command by the Seleucids to kind of bring this line in order, but also finished off the last of really the resistance on the Roman right flank. There's one skirmisher unrouted. A couple of routed cav kicking around back here, but for the most part that's just been wiped out completely. And now the Romans are going to have to use their Greek allies and try to defend their flank here, and it doesn't look very good. They've got to also bring up troops, but they're kind of slow in terms of getting their commands to work. It may be very soon time for the Triarii to actually get involved in this fight, but they're under normal restrictions. Got the elephants coming up. We'll see. And Scipio drives forward in the center, pushing some heavier forces forward. But now I'm realizing, wow, that's not going to be too easy. There's a lot of phalanxes mixed in there. I couldn't just charge forward and hit the elephant without hitting the phalanxes as well. It's an interesting setup. It stretches that phalanx line a little bit more. I still think the Romans are breaking through here and getting themselves into a position where they could swing in and start hitting those phalanxes and roll them up. So there is going to be a problem there, but they kind of have to get more dominance in the center to really do that effectively. Otherwise, they're going to see their legions crumble at the same rate the phalanxes do. And that's something they can't really afford when they're losing this entire flank. I've got one more leader left, the big guy Antiochus. Okay, and the turn ends up with a lot of rallying going on back here, Antiochus, and a couple tactical strikes, especially with the heavy cav, smacking into those legionnaires. One of the units was driven off en route. You got him down here. The other one is not in good shape. So if he turns to go into battle, he may actually just run instead of fighting. He also is kind of exposed there. His own flank is out of place, so there might be a little bit of a trumping activity to try to see who goes first there. But what was looking like a complete Roman rout over here is somewhat less certain here where the infantry are. The legionary infantry are doing a pretty good job of busting up at least the lighter side of Antiochus's line. Those big phalanxes, though, immobile as they are providing something of a barrier to the battlefield. And then we have Seleucid mediums and lights coming around to try that outflanking. There's not a lot of Romans left as a reserve line. We got the Triarii. Everything else has really been thrown in more or less. Granted, these guys are, this legionary line here, which is mainly Hastarte, has not actually been pushed forward, but it's essentially engaged. It's not going to be able to do any big pivots or anything. And it really is the front line. These are just some velites up here. So the Romans are rather stretched, it looks. And point-wise, I haven't calculated them yet. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 12 more. 12 more for the Seleucids, putting them up to 28. And let's see for Rome. 9, 13, 17, 27 for Rome. So now the Romans have actually caught up in points with the Seleucids. It's not just the tactical situation which is favoring the Seleucids. Actually, the actual losses aren't terrible against them, but they have a bunch of units routing here and a few here. So they've got some problems they've got to clear up. And that's going to take commander actions to, halt those retreating units and prevent them from sending the army over the edge. All right, on to the next turn. So one of the Roman commanders charged forward, opening up the new turn, and kind of slammed into those hoplite type silver shield units. Mixed results. The legions have their doubled value, but those things are pretty hefty with 7 size and a 6 tactical quality. They're hard to budge, and especially when you have a couple of them stacked together as you do here. When the Romans hit that, they're kind of like, I hit something heavy there, and didn't necessarily go forward. I got a momentum with the prefect, however, and this is what's interesting. He's not going, or he's going to continue with that momentum, but the biggie here is the Seleucids don't really want to try to trump that. They don't want to fail with one of these guys, and they also don't want to lose momentum by trumping in with a higher valued guy. Even though this guy's kind of in a potent place and you don't want to let him have a momentum, they don't want to risk what they'd lose even if they succeed in stopping it. The other prefect, Coram, threw his forces into the line here to try to stiffen the flank here, and we have whoever this is, Eumenes, tried to rally his forces. He succeeded with his own, fitting enough, but the Romans said, I don't want to follow this guy. He sounds all Greek. And the fighting going on this Roman left flank is kind of a mess. You can see, though, with all these no missile markers, those have to all be Romans, and they're all facing this way. So it looks like the Romans have the slight edge, but there's kind of this pushing back and forth. You can see a decent number of Romans routing, but a lot of Seleucids as well. The Romans try to develop their center a little bit more, sliding some more troops over, pushing, got one routing cav here, pushing the Seleucids out of the way. There's still a very heavy force of cav here that's going to have a massive effect one way or another when it launches with some elephants behind it. Also see the Seleucids beginning to develop their left flank to try to position it so that they can break through the Romans, but the Romans are throwing their counter up, the light infantry and the elephants. It's not sufficient for a long-term solution, but it may be enough that the Romans can perhaps win the battle over in the center here. The Romans are taking losses in higher numbers, though, than the Seleucids, at least right now, but the Seleucids have a lot in the bank in terms of routing units. And now the big push begins. The heavy phalanx comes up, and it's got some bonuses. It's hard to remember what they are because they change from set to set, but I looked in the second edition rules, which actually have, I think, what are the correct ones, and I'm using those now, which gives them a bonus to causing tactical quality hits on the initial shock, essentially, which makes sense. Anyway, that bonus was enough to drive away a unit, and then we also have some of the mediums coming forward and hitting and driving away sort of the corner, the angle of the Roman army. I couldn't bring these guys in, couldn't quite get them into range with him. not enough of them to launch, and I couldn't launch the line, which is what I would have liked to have done. With one more activation, I could have moved into range of them for the line and done some rallying and stuff like that to get things in place. I didn't get that. Yeah, it's okay, but I have these elephants to worry about here. Now we're on to the big guys, the two army leaders. Well, good Lucius Cornelius launched some attacks to try to gain some atge on the phalanx, which had pushed forward. He succeeded in getting that, got a momentum roll. Antiochus rolls to trump, gets a 9 and fails. So not only does he fail to prevent Scipio from doing what he wanted to do, but he also loses his chance to rally all these units, and a lot of units are going to be running off the map because of that. Almost as bad. The Romans are able to inflict flank attack on that double phalanx. They almost broke it. Now they launched 3 legionary units at it just to make sure that they got good dice. They ended up with a 1 cohesion hit for the unit with the advantage versus 8 total for the Seleucids, along with some javelin hits and some cohesion hits from being charged, etc. So this sort of linchpin area is looking a lot stronger for the Romans than it did. It looked like it might buckle with the phalanxes being thrown in. We'll see. This thing isn't very maneuverable. He's got to pull it apart to try to, fill in that hole. Those double phalanxes really don't like to move. All right, I'll come back after the points are scored. Well, here's the net effect on the battlefield after all that. Gotta get this last phalanx. I noticed just as it was going. Still a lot of routed Seleucids, but they're beginning to leave the battlefield at this point. The Romans, good punch through here. Over here, it's hard to tell because it's all yellow, but this is the Roman line. Most of it's Roman. There's a little bit of a hole coming through here with some cav are coming. This is actually a Seleucid cav running around the side, but over here, it's all the Seleucid cav. They've just driven the Romans back, obviously. We've seen that already, though. And we missed a couple of units here to flip over. And yes, this game, it's always a pain in terms of lots and lots of little mechanical stuff. What about the points? All right, 11, 12, 13. And 11 is 24 Seleucid. Puts them up to 52. And 7, 8, 9, that's another skirmisher. 14, 19, 24 for the Romans. Puts them to 58. Point-wise, it's still anybody's battle. It's just a matter of who gets the edge, who's able to roll up the other person's flank the hardest and the fastest. And it's a race for that. And we've seen that a couple of times in some of these SPQR battles. Anyway, up this one goes.